Welcome to another Dark Nook video. In this video, I'm turning this $1 decoration from the Dollar Tree into a Dementor. Now the first thing I'll say about these decorations is I really like the hands. The hands on these are really well done. The skull, not so much, but the hands are great. Once you get all this cheap fabric off, all this thing is a piece of wire attaching a couple pieces of plastic. So it's really easy to modify. But the first thing I have to do is strip it down to its bare bones. In most places, the fabric's just held on with a little dot of hot glue. So it's real easy to tear off. And once you tear the fabric away, you expose the wire that's holding the hands on. But we'll get back to that in a second. Now all the fabric on this thing is just held on with hot glue and one little zip tie. Now it's pretty easy to rip the fabric off the hot glue, and once you've cut that one little zip tie, it's pretty easy to just rip all the fabric away from the hot glue and cut off any of the excess. Now the other thing I'm going to be using in this build is one of these solar-powered Dollar Tree yard lights. Now these lights are really cheap and they're all press fit together, so it's super easy to dismantle them. Everything just pulls apart or slides off. So I remove the hands to work on those later, and then I cut out the hole that's going to be the mouth. And once I have that mouth hole cut out, I trace a circle around the LED unit and then cut a hole out in the back of the skull to mount that. And once it fits, I just anchor it in with some hot glue. Now I don't want to leave the hands looking all flat and straight. Now, I thought about using a heat gun for this, but the problem with the heat gun for this application is that it's too big. It's not delicate enough and it's going to heat the entire hand, and I was worried that would make the fingers all noodly. So instead what I used was just the hot tip of the glue gun to melt the fingers at the knuckles so that they would bend only at the knuckles. Now this plastic is thin enough that you can do that. In the places where it's thick plastic, like around the thumb, I cut it with the snips and then glue it in place. And once the hands are done, I reattach them with the wire, and I put a little bit of hot glue on the end of the wire so there's no pokey bits sticking out to tear into the foam. And now the issue with these decorations is that they just want to hang flat. And I don't want this one to hang flat. I want it to have sort of an angle to it and look like it's flying. So I'm going to add an extra wire to the back to sort of recreate the look of the Dementor's spine as it's flying horizontally, and to provide a little bit of counterweight so this thing isn't quite so top heavy, so that when you hang it from the thread, it'll be easier to make it look like it's flying instead of just hanging flat and straight. And because I cut the hole for the LEDs, I have to punch a new hole in the skull and run a new thread so that I can suspend it. This thread is the only thing I didn't get at the Dollar Tree that I'm using on this build. This is high strength nylon thread that you use for sewing leather. So I poke a new hole in the skull and I run the new piece of thread through. Once I have the thread, I tie the tip to a bit of a chopstick and hot glue that together and pull it back up into the skull. Once I start sculpting the face out of Mod Podge and cotton, it's so simple. This method is almost impossible to screw up. No matter what you do with this, it still looks pretty cool. Now I use a bit of my sculpting skill to give it more of an expression, to give it an angry, menacing look, but even if you just slap this stuff on and didn't have any sculpting experience at all, it's still going to look pretty cool, like kind of like rotten skin, and because the cotton and Mod Podge method sort of automatically takes the shape of wrinkly skin. It honestly almost feels like cheating. It's that easy. And so I just lay down cotton and Mod Podge over all the surfaces of the skull that I want to cover up, which is pretty much the entire face. I'm not worried about the back of the skull or even really the sides of the skull, because that's going to be covered up with the hood. So I just really want to get the parts of the skull that are going to be exposed or only behind the thin black veil. So you'll still kind of see those features. They won't really pop out, but you'll still see them. So I go ahead and work on them as if the entire front of the face was going to be visible. And once that's done, I let it dry and start painting. The paint job is really simple on this because, again, most of it's going to be covered up, and what you see needs to be high contrast. So it's just a black base and a light gray dry brush over the top of it. That is all the painting I did on this. But I did paint the foam in addition to the hands, so that if you do see part of the foam through the black fabric that makes the robe, it'll look like Dementor skin. It won't look like white foam. Now I'm sorry if the angle on this isn't very good, but when I did the wraps on the hands, I cut out some of the fabric that came with the original prop and wrapped it around the hands and the forearms, because the Dementors in the Harry Potter movie have this sort of burial shroud wrapping. So I just used some of the fabric from the original decoration, cut a few strips out of it, and wrapped that around the hands and forearms, and used hot glue to stick it in place. Then I used hot glue to glue the veil, which I used some of the thinner fabric. I ended up using a second version of this same decoration that had black cheesecloth on it instead of white cheesecloth, and I used that for the veil. I also used the arms from that decoration to bulk out the body underneath this prop, so that it didn't quite look like the robe was hanging off of a single point off that back wire. I wanted it to have a little bit of mass to the body, so I just took the arms from this other decoration, attached one end to the neck and the other end to the back of the wire, and the fabric that was already on those served to create a light block and bulk out the mass of the Dementor, so it looked really good once it was finished. And here it is, all finished. The Dollar Tree Dementor. Please like, subscribe, and if you have any questions, add them to the comments below. Thanks for checking out my video.